everyone, it's Kelly here. Welcome to my channel if this is your first time. Welcome back if you've been before. Lovely to have you either way. On this channel we talk books, and today I am wrapping up my reading for the month of August. In August I read 7 books, and I'm going to tell you about them now. I personally think this was quite a successful reading month because I did some project reading, but I also did a bit of finishing off, and that felt good to get some stuff that's been kind of hanging about on my currently reading, off my currently reading. Okay, so the first book that I finished was Ghost Cities by Siang Lu. I have already actually wrapped this one up because I tacked it on to the end of my previous month's reading wrap up. So my very quick summary, I'll link that video up in the cards if you want to see that review in full, but my very quick TLDR is I gave it 3.75 stars. It was amusing in places. It had sort of a two-timeline with stories that kind of spoke to each other as opposed to kind of linking to each other. Yeah, I think there were some issues with it, but it was relatively enjoyable to read as I went along. It also won the Miles Franklin Literary Award here in Australia, and I think I might have been a little bit more critical of it as I was reading because of that. But yeah, it was overall enjoyable, but I'm not sure if it's a winner to me. If I were on that judging panel, I'm not sure that this is the one that I would have fought for. You know what I mean? I liked it, didn't love it. So that was Ghost Cities. As I said, go back to my previous reading wrap up if you want to have a more in-depth review with a bit more of a summary of what actually happens in the book. The next book that I read was an audio book, and I don't have a physical copy of it. It is Unbowed or Unbowed by Wangari Maathai. And this is a memoir of hers. I didn't really know much about her prior to reading the book, but she seems, from the reading of the book, she seems like a very principled person who's done a lot for the environment and also democracy in Kenya, which is the country she's from. I also learned a lot about the political history of Kenya from this book, as well as learning about the author, and I'm really glad to have read this memoir. This is a book that I picked up because if you've been around for a while, you'll know that I take part in a Reading Around the World book club where we are trying to read a book from every country in the world. So this was our pick for Kenya, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I read was Unsettled by Kate Grenville. Now, I read Restless Dolly Maunda from this author, which was nominated for the Women's Prize last year, I think, and I really enjoyed that book. So I was, when this book came out, because I'm pretty sure this was released in 2025. Yes, it was. So when this came out, I picked it up because I had enjoyed that previous book. That's the only other book of Kate Grenville's that I've read. This one is related to another book that she wrote many years ago called The Secret River, which is loosely based on the stories of some of her ancestors and who had come to Australia and sort of settled sort of up the Hawkesbury River and into sort of different parts of New South Wales, which is the state in which I live in Australia. So I was curious about this one because this is actually now the second non-fiction book she's written about the process of writing that book, because this one is her reflecting many years later about the Aboriginal people, the original inhabitants of the lands that her family settled in. And sort of her being curious about that, and she then kind of goes on this almost like a pilgrimage or like a sort of a tour of through these places, and she's just sort of like looking for evidence, looking for local resources, and so on, to kind of inform her about the peoples that her family displaced, essentially, and kind of sitting with that. So I think it's a clever title, because it's almost like settlement in reverse, but also it's that sort of wordplay, the feeling of being unsettled as well. So it was very interesting reflections on her personal connections to atrocities that happened, committed by European settlers, some of whom would have been her ancestors, to the Aboriginal people in the past, in Australia's past. It's certainly something that I think about as well, and I was grateful for the opportunity to continue reflecting about that. And I particularly appreciated her focus on words and how they can obscure the actions of those causing harm. So I can't think of a specific example from the book, but she talked a lot about like the language that was used on signs that talk about the Aboriginal people of that area, or the the wording that's chosen when people talk about it, or the wording that's in official documents and so on, and how that can really obscure what's actually going on, because it's kind of like rounding it off as opposed to being direct about what is actually happening. So those words, even unintentionally, can also say more about what's going on than the person who's selected those words has intended as well, which I think is really interesting. So there's a lot of reflection about that. The one complaint I would have about this is that there's a lot of like self-deprecation in this book. So she's very quick to like denigrate her own thoughts about things. Like she dismisses herself as like a silly old woman and that sort of thing, or what she's doing, she's kind of reflecting on it and being like, oh, this is such a, I'm being ridiculous, or this is a waste of time. And I think I would have preferred not to have that. I think that's a very like internalized voice, that's not a reflection. Like there's nothing, I think what she's done is really great, and I don't think it's a waste of time, and I don't think she's silly for wanting to seek this out and to find out more. Just my opinion. Anyway, it came up enough times that it felt like a pattern to me. So that was one thing that I didn't love about this, but I gave it 4 stars. I thought this was an excellent book. And I haven't read The Secret River. I will at some point, but I haven't yet. So yeah, this was a very interesting read, and I would recommend. Also, before I move on, a big thank you to Tanya, who was my buddy reader for this book. Tanya is a viewer of the channel, and she reached out to me to say she also wanted to read this book when I hauled it, and she asked if we could buddy read it together, and we did, and we had a great time. So thank you, Tanya. All right, the next book, I'm just turning the page in my little journal that I've got sitting here. The next book that I picked up and read is one that has been sitting on my currently reading for a very long time, and that is Pink Slime by Fernanda Trías, translated by Heather Cleary. This is another book that was from my Reading Around the World book club reading challenge that I did not finish at the time in the month that we were reading it. What country was this one for? Uruguay. This was our pick for Uruguay, and the reason that I didn't finish it at the time that I put it down was that it was a little bit heavy, and so I just wasn't in the headspace at the time. It's very bleak, so I put it down for some months, but this month I picked it up and finished it off. So this is a bleak picture of a world following an ecological crisis. The unnamed narrator lives in a port city where most have left to go inland for safety, and keeping her in the city is so her mother is refusing to leave, but also she has a partner, sort of an ex-husband, who has been infected by this, or like his health has been irreparably damaged by this pink slime ecological situation. And so she sort of feels a little bit trapped. Not trapped exactly. She's choosing to stay, but she's got some really intense, like, trauma bonds with these people who are not thinking of her or taking care of her in any way. But she sort of feels, I guess, obliged in some way to stay behind and make sure these people are okay and safe. And that sort of leads her to remain in the city, even though, like, most other people are leaving. She also takes care of a little boy called Mauro, who is from a wealthy family, and he has a disorder or a medical condition of some kind that causes him to always be hungry, and so he just will eat and eat and eat and eat. And obviously, if you're in a kind of like post-apocalyptic world, food can be a little bit more scarce, a bit harder to come by. So yeah, this, you know, that was sort of another ongoing theme, and her kind of like mentally working with this little boy, who the parents kind of just like dump on her for a period, then they come and pick him up. And this is sort of like a big moment when they drop him off, because looking after this boy then kind of consumes her life for that period of time. But that's how she's earning money to buy taxi rides and more food and things like that. So anyway, it's a very well written book, but incredibly bleak, which I wasn't in the mood for, as I said at the time. So that's why I abandoned it temporarily. So yeah, it was a somewhat enjoyable book, I guess. Like enjoyable in the sense of like reading good writing is always a good thing, but it wasn't my favorite book that I've read. I gave it 3 stars. So if you're in the mood for something really bleak, this could be a good one. All right. Obviously, I needed something lighter to help me out here after reading something so bleak. So I picked up The Daughter of Time by Josephine. This is part of the Penguin Classic Crime, this edition anyway, the green spines. Yeah. And this is a book from my husband's shelf, so I will be returning it to him once I've finished filming about it. But yeah, this is a book about a detective who is in hospital because he's had an injury on the job kind of thing, and he is now stuck on his back, like lying on his back, and he's got very limited movement for a time. And he's recovering from a fall that he had while he was pursuing a criminal. And he has a friend who is visiting him, and she recommends he pursue a cold case to kind of keep his mind active. And she brings in all of these like pictures, and he is drawn to a picture of Richard III, former King of England. And that's the case that he ends up settling on, working through. And this is the case of the young brothers, rivals to Richard III in the Tower, and who he supposedly murdered, which is sort of like a popular theory about what happened. And there's been a lot of like literature that kind of comes out post that, that like including Shakespeare's Richard III, which plays on that. So, and him being a horrible person, but then looking at other records he doesn't seem to be a horrible person. He seems to be quite respected, etc. So there's sort of like, and also the picture of him doesn't kind of give this detective who's used to looking at people who have committed crimes and so on, and he's like, this guy is not really giving murderer of 2 children. So anyway, he then tries to unravel the mystery using historical sources and things like that, and that's kind of the story. So I did get a little bit lost as I was reading through this, because my knowledge of English history is pretty scant. I grew up in Australia, not England, so I don't have like the full what all the kings did kind of education that someone who lives in England might. So I didn't really know much about this, although after midway through reading this, I'm like, I have seen Richard III. I went with my husband, like we went and saw it performed. So I've seen the Shakespeare play Richard III. But yeah, and I was like, oh, it's that guy. Right. Yeah, so anyway, clearly that play wasn't super memorable for me, though, like plot-wise, so I didn't put 2 and 2 together until I was like halfway through the book. But I'd be keen to read a non-fiction account with modern evidence now about this, which I may at some point do. But yeah, it was generally the banter between the characters was interesting, the kind of thing I like to read. So yeah, this was enjoyable. I gave it 3.5 stars. I'd recommend if that's the kind of thing you're into. Flicking the page, last one. Right, I've got 2 more books to talk about. The next book I picked up was Just the Plague by Ludmilia Ulitskaya. And this is translated by Polly Gannon. And this was written in, I want to say Russian. Yeah. So yeah, in this book we have a story that's based on events that occurred in Stalinist Russia in 1939. And we have a scientist who's working in infectious diseases in a sort of like remote location. There was an accident. He was accidentally exposed to the plague. And then he traveled to Moscow and he exposed a bunch of other people to the plague. And this was the attempt to quietly contain all the people who'd been exposed so that it didn't create a situation where everybody got the plague. So yeah, I didn't realize at the outset of reading this book that this is essentially a screenplay. It was written as a screenplay, and it was reading as a like screenplay-esque, and I was like, this is weird. And it wasn't until I read the notes afterwards at the end of this edition of the book, that is like a little interview, that I realized that that's why I was feeling that, is because it was written as a screenplay. That was, I don't think, ever made into a film. So it's sort of like, there's not a whole lot of character development in this book. They're sort of more like little vignettes that you kind of go back to. In some ways it kind of reminded me a little bit of Under Milkwood by Dylan Thomas that I read, because that I think was a radio play, and it similarly is those little vignettes of characters, then you come back to that character, but there's not like a whole lot of character development. You're just kind of like getting these little insights into who this person is, but then like because the depth isn't there, they're not always necessarily a memorable character. Yeah. And there are a lot of characters in this as well, is the other thing I would say. The tension was well done, though, so I felt very compelled to keep reading, and I read it very quickly. But overall, this was just okay for me, so it was a 3-star read. But I'm glad to have read it, and to sort of have learnt about that situation that really did happen, and how it was kind of hushed up, and what the, like, aftermath, like how that kind of thing got contained at that time. Alright, the last book that I finished is another one that had been languishing on my currently reading for a while, and I'd sort of lost a bit of interest in it halfway through, but I was like, let me just finish it off. It's just a kid's book, it'll be fine. And that is the Midwatch by Judith Rossell. So this is a middle grade book that I would have absolutely lapped up as a kid, but as an adult reading it, it didn't do it for me in the same way that it would do if I were like 11. So we follow a character called Maggie, who is a kid that's sent to the Midwatch Institute for Orphans, which turns out to be a front for this group of, they are orphans, they all do get sent there for some reason, but secretly all the teachers are really nice, and they're like, they solve crimes, like all the kids work together, they get trained in how to solve crimes, and then they kind of sneak through the city solving crimes, basically, but to the like inspectors who think that everybody who's an orphan should be having an awful time, they have to kind of put on a bit of a show that like everyone's like sensible and quiet and dour, and having an awful time. So that's kind of the vibe of the book and the basic premise. But we follow Maggie, who gets sent there, and then she sort of has these, her little group that she gets placed with, who are like the first years, kind of get, they solve their first crime, basically, is kind of the plot line of the book. But it's fun. There's like secret tunnels under the city, they wear disguises, there's like hidden gadgets and all of that sort of thing. So it's the kind of stuff I would have loved as a kid. I would say the second half of the book picked up the pace of the plot a little bit more, which, you know, helped me to kind of read it a little bit more at more pace. But yeah, the first half kind of lagged a little bit and I got a little bit bored. And I also felt that the kids, and this is a big issue for me in books that have kids in them, if the kids don't feel like real kids, I kind of check out a little bit. So this, I felt sometimes the kids weren't always believably written, which was a bit of a problem. But for its target audience, though, I reckon it would be spot on. I think kids would really love this, so I wouldn't recommend it necessarily for adults to read, but for kids, if you know a kid who's like into spies and like that kind of thing, which I definitely was as a kid, highly recommend for kids. But for me, it was just a 3-star read. So that's it. That is my August. So I got through a lot of books. The thing I think I'm most pleased about is that I was able to get some books off my currently reading that had been sitting there for a long time. And I still have a bunch that are kind of sitting here, books I've like abandoned either temporarily or as a stopover for DNFing, which I do need to keep going through, but I'm pleased that I got 2 of them off this in August. That was great. And also I read some really great books too, like a few 4-star reads, a few, yes, 2 4-star reads, which I think is great. So yeah, a pleasing month, successful reading month. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you've read any of these books and you have things you want to say about them, either in support of what I've said or you have a different opinion, that's fine. Would love to talk about it with you in the comments. So thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.